Hey church family, we had some unfortunate technological difficulties and our sound pooped out about 10 minutes from the end. So I'm going to take it up from where I was at point 5. So point 5 was all about God's plan. So the plan was for the redemption of the nations, that they would see and get to participate in new life, a new way of living, a new way of seeing the world. This plan would ultimately end at the cross, or begin at the cross, be mediated by the cross, a light of revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of his people Israel, as Simeon prophesied. As always, God's plan starts with the most unlikely of persons. This is always the way, sending a fragile baby in poverty into a manger in the most bloodthirsty time in history under the most ruthless nation. It's the foolishness of God that always shames the wisdom of man. God was not thwarted by an old man with character flaws who made bad choices. God's plan came about despite the moral failings and a generational line with a whole lot of brokenness and messiness. What broken men intended for evil, God repurposed for good. God always repurposes for good. God partners with the messy, with the broken, with flawed people to show the nations his goodness. Romans 4 says, "Therefore, the promise comes by faith, so that it may be by grace and may be guaranteed to all of Abraham's offspring, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who have the faith of Abraham. He is the father of us all. As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations. He is our Father in the sight of God, in whom he believed, the God who gives life to the dead and calls into being things that were not." You see, God sees the full story. He sees the big picture. We only get to see a small sliver of the story because our years on earth, maybe we're given 70, 80, 90 years at most, we get to see just a small sliver of what God is up to. And seeing what is around us in this day and age, it's really easy to lose sight of that which is most important, that God is at work in our world, despite nations crumbling, despite wars and pandemics, despite the ruthlessness of people, that God is still at work, that he is working good, that he is healing hearts, that he is saving marriages, he is delivering people, he is redeeming. One of my favorite musicals growing up was the movie The Prince of Egypt. One of Steven Spielberg and DreamWorks' finest, all-star cast with Val Kilmer, Jeff Goldblum, Michelle Pfeiffer. Anyway, there's this point where Moses, being played by Val Kilmer, is in exile in the wilderness, and he goes to where his future father-in-law, Jethro's place, would be out in Midian. And he's explaining to his father-in-law that he doesn't feel like he's done anything in his life worthy of honor. And his father-in-law, Jethro, played by Danny Glover, says, "It seems that you don't know what is worthy of honor." And then he sings this amazing song that I'm not going to try to replicate here because that would be embarrassing, because I need, the Bedouin drums and the tambourines in the background. But what he does is there's this glorious tapestry behind the campfire, and he goes up to it and he grabs one of the threads, and this is a Mexico blanket. This is a poor imitation of one of those Midian tapestries, but and these threads tend to be all the same color, and the one in the movie was it was bright, it was like red or something like that. But then he starts singing the song, and the words of the song are what I want to focus on. He says, "A single thread in this tapestry, though its color brightly shine, you can never see its purpose and the pattern of the grand design." Then he points to a mountain and he says, "And the stone that sits on the very top of that mountain's mighty face, does it think it's more important than the stones that form the base?" And he gets to the chorus, it's building, and he says, "So how do you judge what a life is worth or where your value lies? You can never see through the eyes of man. You must look at your life through heaven's eyes." And this powerful reminder that God sees things differently. He sees us differently. He sees the way our fragile, messy lives are being woven into a story that has a beautiful pattern and has a purpose. And yet we might not see what this thread is, up to right here. Because the big picture matters, and it's so easy for us to lose sight of the big picture. Because we're jaded by our own faulty perspectives, our inadequacies, our life choices, hurts done to us, our family of origin, our age, our gender. Our current struggle, though, does not disqualify us from God working us into his beautiful story of the redemption of the world. When we feel like mess-ups or irredeemable, we've got to remember that the tapestry is already written. God sees the end result. He sees what it looks like. He sees the whole tapestry, even though we feel like our thread is fraying or our color is just a bland gray. My wife never got to know my dad before he had Parkinson's disease. So like growing up, I knew him as the man who could do anything. He boxed, he played baseball, he broke his collarbone playing rugby, and then went straight into the police academy after that. And in the police academy, they were training, they had to do push-ups. So he would do like 21-arm push-ups just to show up his classmates. We did archery together, he taught me how to hunt. So we'd shoot guns, do whitewater rafting, cross-country skiing. He was always hiking up in Lassen National Park. Check out this picture of my dad. He's holding a tennis ball here. And dude, he's jacked. Like, who else do you know that can make holding a tennis ball look sexy? Here's another shot of my dad, whitewater rafting. Everyone's freaking out. And then there's my dad in the middle. He's ripped and he's calm and he's holding it all together. Like, this is my memory of my dad. He was the beefcake who loved Jesus. And when he turned 50, he got Parkinson's almost overnight. And 17 years of battling that debilitating disease, which would ultimately take his life. For a long time, Dad he confided in me, he felt like his life was stolen from him. He wanted to get back to normal. Haven't we all said that recently? Said, we just want to get back to normal? As if there is a normal. Dad wasn't given that. When Dad's mobility was taken from him, he told me he felt crippled. And then when his voice was taken from him, he felt useless. And yet my dad still had so much to give. He would sit at the computer for hours at a time emailing people, pastors, friends, just encouraging them. When he would write me, he would praise me for my gifting and talents, and he would always remind me to use those to the glory of God, and then to remind me how proud he was of me. Dad was using the only thing he had left to pour into others, painstakingly typing one finger at a time. My dad wasn't obsolete. Even when he felt like he had nothing left to give, God still used him profoundly. God probably used my dad more when Dad felt like he wasn't enough, when Dad felt like he had nothing left to give. None of us are obsolete. There is no obsolete person in this church family. God doesn't make mistakes. We don't live here in Chico, Magalia, Durham, Oroville, Paradise on accident. The family in which you live, the hard job that you work, the school that's consuming all of your time. God doesn't look over the lonely. He doesn't overlook the broken, the forgotten, the abused. It is we who make up the family of God. And Jesus has invited us into that belonging, into that family where he calls us brothers and sisters and crazy uncles and black sheep. A long line of broken people stretching all the way back to Abram, a man who in his brokenness said yes to the promise of God. Hebrews 11:39 says that Abram never got to see the fulfillment of the promise God had made toward him. But we get to experience it now. And we'll get to follow his story over the next few weeks and see his terrible choices, see him unintentionally try to screw up the plan of God. And yet we'll see that God redeems everything. His master plan is still on track. And God makes sense. And God makes beautiful the story. Our single thread is being woven together into a beautiful tapestry that when we step back and see through heaven's eyes, we get to see a combined picture, seen as a whole, the story of the goodness of God. Let's live out of that goodness this week. Thanks.